Hello all of you beautiful people, Jules here for WhatCulture.com, and I don't know about you, but I absolutely adored the Batman animated series. From start to finish, there was never a dull moment in that, and it made my childhood watching it on the weekend. So naturally, I was ecstatic to find out that Superman would also get the same treatment with Superman, the animated series. And while it wasn't as good as the Batman counterpart in my opinion, it still became such a beloved property that fans have been calling out for it ever since, because it reinvented Superman and what he was to a new generation of fans. This wasn't just the old-fashioned, cheesy Superman, this was a hero with a bit more sass and bite, while still being able to be the moral tentpole for DC to anchor itself to. And thanks to its beautiful animation and stellar voice work, it still holds up today. However, as you might expect, there's a ton of details which many have missed or simply forgotten since watching it as a youth, so let's take a refresher course together. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 mind-blowing facts you didn't know about Superman the animated series. Number 10. Who nearly played Superman? To hardcore DC fans, Mark Hamill is the Joker, Kevin Conroy is Batman, and for many, Tim Daly, who plays the title character in Superman the animated series, is seen as the definitive voice of the iconic superhero. And Daly's portrayal was actually very influential because he chose to play Superman and Clark Kent with the same voice, which was a first because up until then, Kent had been played as a kind of nervous bumbler and Superman as much more confident. Here though, both identities were fierce and booming. But things almost turned out completely differently since the role nearly went to Adam Baldwin. Baldwin, who had starred in Full Metal Jacket and Independence Day, was also really well known for Jane Cobb in the TV series Firefly. But don't feel sorry for him on missing out on this because he did get the chance to voice Superman in the 2007 animated film Superman Doomsday and the 2011 video game DC Comics Online. Number 9. The show couldn't use Zod. Outside of Lex Luthor, the malevolent Kryptonian General Zod is possibly the most well-known Superman villain. And yet, isn't it completely strange to note that despite this huge popularity, Zod never made a single appearance in the series? And why was this? Well, the answer is no idea. Many people theorized that the show's producers couldn't get the rights for the character. I mean, this was true for Zod's henchman Ursa at least, since she was created for the film, meaning that DC Comics didn't actually have the authority to license her to the series. However, that doesn't explain why Zod himself was missing. Instead, in the animated series, Supes faced off against Jax-Ur, who in the comics was a Kryptonian scientist who was banished to the Phantom Zone for blowing up Krypton's moon, but in the show, he completely resembled Zod in both appearance and mannerisms. Still, it's a very strange moment indeed. Number 8. One episode featured a parody of S.H.I.E.L.D. In the first episode of Season 3, Where There's Smoke, Superman hunts a pyrokinetic called Volcana who is being sought out by a mysterious government agency. As soon as the rogue agency appears, it's unmistakable that they are based on the counter-terrorist agency from Marvel Comics, S.H.I.E.L.D. The leader of the group even has an eye patch, just like the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., Nick Fury. At first, you might think that that's just a coincidence though, but it doesn't stop there. One of the operatives has a bowler hat and a handlebar mustache, much like Timothy Dum Dum Duggan, who is Fury's right-hand man. And as a final Easter egg, the workers in the underground facility wear uniforms which are almost identical to the beekeeper outfits worn by agents of AIM, the first enemy S.H.I.E.L.D. faced in the comics. Number 7. Executives kept meddling with the plot. Since Superman is the world's most famous superhero, you'd assume it would be fun making the show based on his comic series, right? Well, unfortunately, the writers regularly met with frustration since they had to work around many of the producers' restrictions. Superman's adopted parents, Jonathan and Martha Kent, were supposed to die at one point, but the producers vetoed this decision, stating that it violated their rules for depicting death in cartoons. They said that the Kents could only die if they came back to life in a later episode, and because this would have cheapened the moment, the writers opted not to do it. DC Comics executives also butted heads with the writers when it came to Supergirl. At the time that the series was going on, in the comics, they'd made it clear that Kara was from a different dimension, as they wanted Kal-El to be the last Kryptonian, and refused to allow the show to make her his actual cousin. This led to the decision that Kara would instead originate from the planet Argo rather than Krypton. Talk about a petty change, right? And actually, speaking of Kara, number 6. An episode was changed because it was deemed too dark. The episode Little Girl Lost debuted Superman's air quotes cousin, Kara. After she discovers a criminal's hideout, Kara uncovers a teleporter which transports her to Apocalypse, which is ruled by Darkseid. While on the inhospitable world, Superman and Supergirl learn that Darkseid is preparing to obliterate Earth. However, this was not the first draft of the story. The original idea for this two-part arc had roughly the same gist. Superman and Supergirl would uncover evidence that proved Darkseid was planning to destroy the world, but in the original script, Superman learned this after witnessing denizens of Apokolips transforming humans into mindless slaves called parademons. This would then mean that Superman would be forced to fight these creatures, knowing that they were victims of Darkseid's twisted plan. Although the writers were thrilled with this part of the story, the producers decided to cut it, believing that the finished version was too dark even after approving the original pitch. As a result, the plot structure was heavily revised. Number 5. Some characters were incorporated into the comics. It's common knowledge that Harley Quinn debuted in Batman the Animated Series before she appeared in the comics, and the Superman animated team wanted to try and capture lightning in a bottle with their introduction of Livewire, who they hoped would be the next Harley Quinn. Sadly, people didn't gravitate towards the character. You see, Harley was a kooky, funny character, but also had a tragic backstory making her sympathetic. On the other hand, Livewire, well, acted obnoxiously and nasty to Superman even when the Man of Steel saved her life. Although Harley was incorporated into the comics as soon as possible, Livewire didn't appear for 10 years after the series and only showed up in 2 episodes of the show. However, Livewire isn't the only character who appeared in the show before the comics, as the show also debuted Lex Luthor's ally in crime, Mercy Graves. She only appeared in 9 episodes, but fans were won over by her relationship with Lex since she gave the supervillain much more depth. Mercy debuted in the comics 3 years after her appearance in the show and even made a cameo in Batman vs. Superman. Number 4. Superman was made weaker. Over the years, Superman has showcased his unequaled strength countless different ways. It's pretty insane, and it was getting to the point where a lot of fans and even the writers thought of him as invincible. Now, this posed a problem while making the series, because the story would lack tension if Superman couldn't be harmed. The villains could obviously immobilize him with kryptonite, but it would get repetitive if a criminal did this in every episode. So what they did was make him considerably weaker, meaning that we were witness to Superman being beaten unconscious, tortured, brainwashed, plus he was absolutely useless against magic. And to be honest, this was the smartest move possible, as audiences wouldn't have cared if the stakes were non-existent, and it made it all the more satisfying when he would finally win out in the end. Number 3. The last season was axed. The 2-part finale, Legacy, had Superman brainwashed into believing that he was a soldier of Apokolips and the son of Darkseid. After Superman declares war on Earth, humanity finally loses faith in the last son of Krypton. Naturally, Superman breaks free of his mind control and defeats the forces of Apokolips. But in the final scene, Superman acknowledges that humanity no longer trusts him, even despite Lois Lane reassuring him that we'll win them back one person at a time. It's a pretty bittersweet ending, right? Well, originally that's because it wasn't meant to be the ending at all and was meant to have had a whole other season follow it in which Supes won back the hearts of humanity by doing what he does best. Sagging ratings and stiff competition from Batman Beyond seemed to have been the resulting factors behind the cut, and the writing team were moved to a Justice League cartoon because Batman was shifting units and having him in the same space as Superman was much less of a risk going forward. And you know what? They were damn right, because Justice League might be one of the most accomplished animations ever. Number 2. Dan Turpin was inspired by Jack Kirby. Jack Kirby is one of the most influential people in comics history. He co-created Marvel, concocted hundreds of characters, and devised the Fourth World mythos in DC Comics. Because Kirby died shortly before Superman the Animated Series was greenlit, the writers felt obliged to commemorate the writer/artist in some way. And so when the creators incorporated Detective Dan Turpin into the show, they based Turpin's face and attitude on Kirby's. Turpin was a brash inspector who followed his gut rather than protocol, much to the chagrin of his co-workers. He always had his friends' backs and would never back down from a fight. And when he was chosen to die at the hands of Darkseid, a funeral was held for the character, which also acknowledged Kirby's work. And number 1, Superman team-ups. From the story standpoint, Superman the Animated Series couldn't have been more straightforward, but the initial idea was actually very different indeed, seeing as the writers originally considered making the series a team-up show. This would have meant that every single episode would have had the Kryptonian allying with a member of the Justice League. Bruce Timm was so adamant on the idea, he drew up sketches for many characters who were meant to appear in the series, but this idea was abandoned because the producers were concerned that the barrage of cameos would overshadow Superman. Even after this concept was axed though, Timm still tried to have episodes where Superman teamed up with Wonder Woman and Shazam, who was going by Captain Marvel at the time, to help set up the Justice League cartoon. but these plans sadly fizzled out as well. However, as I said before, things did work out in the end because we got that Justice League cartoon, and my god, what a ride it was. And there we go, those were 10 mind-blowing facts you didn't know about Superman the Animated Series. I hope that you enjoyed that, my friends, and please let me know down below what you thought about it, as well as your favourite episode from the series, because I'd love to hear your opinions. As always, I've been Jules. You have indeed been awesome. Never forget that, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.